So, this episode is going to be a little bit shorter, but we're going to try and put some stuff together. So, the way I've kind of got it in my head is that I want to cover classes or instances of classes interacting with other instances of classes. But I also want to show a little bit more about how to structure Ruby code, because it's important that you understand as you start writing applications or bigger applications that you can't have your code all in one file. I mean it's hard to read, it's bad practice, it's not modular. Pick a reason. It might be might look good, or let me rephrase, it might be easier, but it's not good practice. So let's go ahead and set out what we'll be doing. So what we're going to do is have a fight. We're going to have a little fight going on. We're going to have a player class, which you've just seen me close, fight a monster and slay him in glorious combat. So how are we going to do that? We're going to make a class, obviously, and the class will probably be player, and then we'll probably have a monster class, and then we'll need to get them to interact. So let's get that set up. We're not going to start an IRB today, because this is a little bit more complicated, and we're going to need to actually have files that we execute. So let's start. So class player, and this should be no different to what you're expecting. Let's call this player.rb. And what attributes do we need? Well, if we're fighting somebody, and we want to know whether we won or not, I guess health would be kind of a useful attribute to have. So @accessor health. Now, the monster is also going to have health, because we're attacking him, and let's for the minute assume that our monster is not going to attack us back. We're very lucky because we're super fast. So we'll have a monster class as well, and he's also going to have health. And so you can see that as we go down, we've got this class player, class monster, and then we're going to maybe like player equals player.new, then monster equals monster.new, and then player.do things monster. It's going to get a very, very long file, and it's going to eventually, we'll have code in here that does things, and it will get long and unwieldy and hard to read. So the way Ruby is generally set out for even the simplest of applications is that you separate every class into its own file of the same name as the class. So in this case, we have the class player in the player.rb. So what we should do is have this monster class in its own monster.rb file, right? And then that goes away for the minute. Right, so we start going, oh, well then, how do you use monster? How can you do this? And the answer to that is something called require. So Ruby has this concept of loading code into it from certain paths in your computer, in your system. And we won't go too much into that because there's a lot of complexity that comes about when you start considering load paths and load orders and namespacing and such things. So I want to keep it kind of simple today and just show you how to work with something that is kind of like this flattened structure. So let's create application file. So we'll call this app.rb, or maybe fight.rb, since that's kind of what's happening in it. And we'll go player.new. So knight is player.new. And he's going to be an imp, monster.new. And we'll run this. And I don't know whether you are following along, but this should break. So it's saying uninitialized constant player. And what this is saying is this class doesn't exist. It's a constant that Ruby is looking for. Constants are well, classes are fixed values that cannot change, that are generally denoted by a capital letter starting it. So what it's telling us is it can't find the class, essentially. And that's correct, because within this class, within this file, there is no class player. So if we actually did this, it would then complain, well, there's no monster. And then we did this, and it would be fine. But we don't want to do that. We've established that that's not good long term. So what do? We can do this. We use this require keyword, and we say require /, which is saying the current directory, so the same directory that this file is in, and then we say player. And then we can do the same thing for monster. In fact, we don't even need the RBs. And now it's able to go and load the code inside of this player file and class, and we suddenly have access to all of that. So that's how you start structuring your Ruby code. Now let's start working with our Ruby code, and we're going to learn a little bit about how you use classes to modify their own state and track it and reflect their internal state with kind of helper methods. So to explain, I'll just write code because it's easier that way. So let's see. How do we want to structure this? Let's say for the monster, let's keep it simple for the minute. Let's say that we want to know whether the monster is dead or not. So we want to know if we've won the fight, whether we're victorious. Excuse me. So how do you know if something's dead? In RPG world, the health is reduced to 0. So what can you do? You can say let's say dead, and then using that question mark syntax that Ruby allows, or maybe we'll give it a little bit nicer, slain, health equals to 0, or in fact realistically less than 1. You don't really want to go into negatives, but the idea here is that you write code that allows the cases. So you don't want to go, well, if somehow you accidentally like overkill them, like they have 2 health left and you hit them for 5, and this was this, well, he's not dead, and he's never going to be dead, because you're going to keep hitting him, and it's going to keep saying, yeah, no, he's still alive. So we want to have less than 1. So this will capture 0 and anything less than 0. So you can overkill him as much as you want and he'll die. And that's important. So you need to be aware of these things are called edge cases. They're very important things to be thinking about as you're writing code, because they'll bite you in the ass. So that's cool. We're able to now ask the monster if it's dead. I'm sure he would like to say false the entire time, but we've written the code and he can't, so too bad for him. But we need a way of attacking him, and this is where it gets kind of interesting. There's a few ways to do this. We could put the attack method on here, so attack. But when you think about this, what you're saying is monster, and you're telling monster to attack. So it doesn't kind of work. You realistically, either want to flip this and say be attacked. So remember that we're only doing this for the monster being attacked. So you could call it like be attacked, or take damage or something like that. Or we could put it on the player class and tell the player to attack something or to attack someone. And this is where we're going to start learning a little bit about using classes to interact with other classes. So we've seen methods to being able to take parameters like a string or something like that, like a name or age or something like that. But it holds that you can also do the exact same thing with classes that you have defined, and it should be no surprise because they're still just a class. Everything is just a class. There's, I believe, nothing in Ruby. This is where I might be showing my my ignorance, but I believe nothing in Ruby is not a class. So everything in Ruby, I believe, is a class that inherits from object. So let's make it attack something, and we can make it attack monster. Now, how much does it attack it for? Well, maybe we want some attribute. So we can say he does this amount of damage. And is that all we need? Yeah, I think that's all we need. So we can say monster.health equals monster.health minus damage. Right? So we take health, his health away as we attack him. So we say player attack this monster, and the player attacks the monster. So let's try this out. Let's do the thing. So knight, I want you to attack the imp. And then what do we want to do? Imp, are you dead? And if you're following along, this won't work. Okay, so first thing that's happened is it's saying undefined method minus for nil class. So what this is basically telling us is some of these values are nil, and that's true. None of them have been set. So what do we do? Okay, well, the first thing that we can do to make this work is come here and we say, well, the knight has 10 damage, and the imp has 5 health. Let's kill him. Let's kill him dead. Alright, so we'll fight him again, and we've missed something. What have we missed? He's got health, and the player has damage. What have we missed, huh? Player.rb line 5. Excuse me. Apologies. Monster.health. So imp.health is 5. So we've set that. Oh, wow, my brain is in all kinds of... This is what happens when you write code and are talking and such at the same time. We had to set the values before we use them, of course, because, duh. And the method is slain, not dead. Okay, there we go. We've managed to kill him. That was a little topsy-turvy. So we've managed to kill the imp, which is great, but it's not perfect. This isn't ideal. We want to be able to attack him maybe multiple times, or we want to maybe like a back and forth. But before we do that, this code is kind of ugly, and we've managed to trip ourselves up. Like with this, we were tripping ourselves up by not having set things. So first we're going to do something about that. And we're going to do something called constructors. Now constructors are, when we're calling this new method, it's basically telling Ruby go and create me an instance of this class. And that's all it's telling it right now. But we want to actually do something like, well, go and create an instance of this class with 10 health, and go and create an instance of this class with 10 health, but maybe the player takes also how much damage he can do as a parameter. And this is doable in Ruby. So what we do is we come in here, and there's another magical method on Ruby on classes called initialize. And initialize is a method that is automatically called for you when you use new on an object. So what will happen is you'll call new, and Ruby will do some things, and then it will call initialize on your behalf with these values. And these values are health and damage. Now, it's important to note here, because we're constructing the class and the class doesn't fully exist yet. The best way to think of it is the class doesn't fully exist yet. These attribute accessor methods also don't exist yet and shouldn't be called the way that we would normally call them. So in fact, what we're going to do is this. And we've seen this before. We know that the attribute accessor creates two methods. One is health, and it returns health. And this is, remember, the actual variable that holds the value. So we're actually manually setting that variable to the value that we pass in. So we can take this and copy it to the monster and allow him to take how much health he has. He doesn't take any damage, we haven't set that. And then we come to the fight. And we say the player has 10 health, 5 damage, and the monster takes 10 health. The monster has 10 health. So now, when we run this again, well, we haven't killed him because we only did 5 damage and he's got 10 health. So we could attack him again, and now he's dead. That's cool. And then we can put a little bit more of a spin on it using some of the other things that we've learned. So we can use another type of loop that we weren't introduced to yet, while. And while is basically a nice way of thinking about do something while something is true. So while what is true, do something. Well, while the imp is not dead, so while imp.slain, but not imp.slain, and this is the Ruby, it's not specific to Ruby, it's kind of generic to a lot of programming languages, but this basically says take this condition, take this value, and invert it. So if it's true, make it false. If it's false, make it true. So while not slain, I have autocomplete for some things like this. I don't want it though. While imp.slain, knight.attack imp. And we don't need this. It'll kill it for us automatically. So he attacks it, well, twice. And in fact, we can say puts I am valiantly attacking the imp. There you go. You can see he attacks it twice before it returns true, which is exactly what we want. And if we don't like doing things like this, if we don't want to have this while not, we can start flipping things. So we can say, well, alive, and we can do things like not slain. Put that below. So what we're actually doing is we're saying, go and call the method that actually has the logic on it, and then just invert the return value. So while imp is alive, kill him, right? That's how it works. And then we could do the same thing. We could take this a bit further and say, well, you know, this poor, imp is taking a beating. He needs he needs to have a go at fighting the knight. So let's let him attack things. Oh, well, we'll go and copy the code. And now hopefully some of you out there are going, really, copying code? Like, that's kind of shitty. And you're right, it is shitty. This is one of the things that has commonly caused a lot of problems in the programming world is, well, I want this code to be shared here and then this code to be shared here, and I want to, be able to change the functionality of a class or a set of classes or mass without changing it in 50 different places, right? So, does that make sense? So the first way that most people do this is they go and copy and paste the code, which is, it's okay. It's not really extendable. It doesn't really last too long before you start getting the shits and, kind of banging your head against the wall. And then the second way people reach for fixing this is they do something called inheritance. And that's kind of a good way of doing it. It works okay, but it has its own problems. And if you're interested in learning more about this, you can go and look up inheritance versus composition. And as I've alluded to, the other way people do this is through composition. And composition allows you to take a set of code similar to the way that enumerable worked and include it inside of a class without saying that that class is your parent class. And a parent class is basically a class that you inherit methods and attributes from. So we won't go too much into that because it's a little more complicated, but let's kind of go with this and make the monster attack the knight. So where are we? We have an attack method, and how are we going to do this? While imp is alive, or knight.alive. Knight can go first. Now, hopefully, you guys will know what's about to happen. So there's no damage on monster. We need to define that. And then we need to allow them to take that as a variable. Excuse me. And then we need to supply it. And now hopefully you'll know what's going to happen. Well, possibly not actually. Okay, well we need to set and this is where it becomes that, well, we start copying and pasting heaps of code and we need to start inheriting it or composing it or whatever else. Okay, it becomes very, very cumbersome to maintain sets of code like this, and there's all these interesting discussions that happen about when do you inherit or when do you compose, and at what point do you start doing that? Like, do you say, oh well, they're similar enough that we can just write some conditions and work around their slight differences, or do you only do that when you can see an absolute guarantee that they're the exact same thing and they share common ground? So what we see here is we attack him and eventually the imp dies. So this is pretty much how you do class interactions. It's not the most complicated thing in the world. I don't want to get too much further into this because it's probably kind of an overload given that we've just gone through the basics of Ruby and now we're suddenly having things attack one another and call methods and things like that. So I'm actually going to leave this episode here. It's going to be a bit of a shorter one, and I'm going to go away and come up with some different and more interesting things to do, where we'll probably touch on starting to work with external libraries and bring code in to start using as part of our everyday coding life. Because from here, I can only show you so much more code in classes before it really just becomes repetitive create method to do some kind of logic. And that logic is going to be so infinitely different and variant based on your needs that it's not really worth it. So I won't leave you with a particular problem in terms of something that's actually broken, but what I will say is it would be interesting for you to try and make it so the knight attacks multiple imps at once, or it you know, fights, you know, an imp and a dragon or something, and maybe the dragon can be a different class with different health requirements and things like that. And if you wanted to go even further, you can start doing things like giving them weapons or variable damage. So anyway, I will leave it here, and we'll pick up again probably in half an hour or so, doing some other interesting stuff, like maybe talking to Google, or you know, working with HTTP libraries, or you know, other gems. So yep, cool. All right, boy.